shove that bat up your ass and turn you into a popsicle.
Did you know James Remar was originally cast as Corporal Hicks in Aliens, but was suddenly replaced just days into filming? The reason why is complicated, and I'll circle back to that later. My perception of James Remar was always a little different. He came across as dark, dangerous, and incredibly enigmatic on screen. There was a tension to him, like something could snap at any moment, and that edge, it never really went away. So, what the hell happened to James Remar? Let's fade to black. James Remar was born William James Remar on December 31st, 1953 in Boston, Massachusetts. His father was a lawyer, his mother worked in mental health, both stable, respectable careers. But Remar, he always seemed drawn to something less predictable, less safe. He studied at the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theatre in New York, the same institution that produced legends like Gregory Peck, Diane Keaton and Steve McQueen. It was there that Remar began to shape that presence, the coiled, magnetic energy that would define so many of his roles. From the very beginning, there was something intense about him. He wasn't the typical leading man. He didn't smile his way into auditions. He glared, he brooded, he burned holes in the room. Directors really noticed him, casting agents took chances with him, and slowly the industry began to recognise that James Remar wasn't just another actor, he was something else entirely. For a lot of people, James Remar's breakout came in The Warriors, and for me that was the first time I ever saw him on screen. He played Ajax, the short-tempered brawler who didn't think, he just fought. And Remar was Ajax. He didn't feel like he was acting. He felt like something in him could snap at any second. The intensity didn't seem put on, it just really felt real. The Warriors became a cult classic, but even among all the wild characters, Remar really did stand out. There was something physical and volatile about him, the way he moved, the way he stared people down. You couldn't take your eyes off of him. Off screen, he didn't play the Hollywood game either. You didn't see him smiling for cameras or working the press. There was a real distance to him, a kind of quiet tension that only added to his mystique. He was never the lead, not in the traditional sense, but when he turned up in a scene, he took it over. He really did have that kind of presence. After The Warriors, he'd work again with director Walter Hill, this time opposite Eddie Murphy, in a film that would fully cement his place as one of the most intense supporting actors of the decade. 48 Hours hit theatres in 1982, and it changed a lot of things. It launched Eddie Murphy into stardom, and gave James Remar one of the most cold-blooded characters of his entire career. He played Albert Gans, a violent, unhinged escaped convict, and he played him like a shark. Always moving, always dangerous. I remember watching this and realising this guy wasn't just intense, he was scary. There was no winking at the audience, no soft edges. Remar didn't really play villains with any charm. He wasn't Robert Shaw or Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber, the kind of smooth-talking antagonist you secretly root for. He came across like someone genuinely dangerous and unpredictable. He didn't seem like a guy pretending to be a killer. He seemed like someone who was one. His work in 48 Hours locked him in as Hollywood's go-to heavy. From there, he popped up in genre films like The Cotton Club, Cruising, Quite Cool, and Rent-A-Cop. He never quite knew where he'd turn up, but when he did, he gave everything a little more tension and a little more edge. But behind the scenes, things were starting to crack. He had the talent, and he had the presence. But something was pulling at the edges, and not everyone in the industry was willing to keep giving him second chances. And that brings us full circle back to Aliens, and what should have been the biggest break of his entire career. By 1985, James Remar had been cast in what should have been the biggest film of his career, Aliens. He was chosen to play Corporal Hicks, a key character in James Cameron's high-stakes sci-fi follow-up to Alien. Filming began in England, sets were built, scenes were shot. Remar spent days working with James Cameron and the rest of the cast. He was there for some of the most intense action sequences early in production, suited up, locked in and delivering lines. But something was off. Cameron reportedly sensed the tension, the energy, and eventually things just snapped. And just like that, he was gone. At the time, the public explanation was vague. In a 1986 Starlog interview, Remar said, "Aliens was a 4-month commitment in a foreign country which I was willing to make. Unfortunately, urgent matters at home required that I return to the States and attend to them. They got someone else and I came home and took care of the problems and moved on to Band of the Hand." The official story was vague. Creative differences, scheduling conflicts. But years later, Remar admitted the truth. He had been struggling with heroin addiction, and it caught up with him on set. He was arrested for possession during filming and quietly fired from the production. Years later, Remar would come clean in a podcast interview. "I had a terrible drug problem, but I got through it. I had a great career and personal life and messed it up with a terrible drug habit." And in an episode of the Sidebar podcast, he finally admitted it outright. "I was initially cast as Corporal Hicks, and I was fired after a couple of weeks filming because I got busted for possession of drugs. Michael Biehn replaced me. That drug was heroin." Michael Biehn was flown in to replace him and had to jump in without rehearsal, sometimes even mimicking blocking that had already been shot with Remar. The rest of the cast noticed the sudden change. There was confusion, whispers, and more than a few questions that never really got answered at the time. If you watch Aliens closely, a few shots of Remar's back or silhouette still remain in the final cut, a ghost of what could have been. This wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was the kind of blow most careers don't recover from. There were consequences, and one of the biggest came from director Walter Hill, the same man who had given Remar his first major roles in The Warriors and 48 Hours. "Getting fired from Aliens alienated me from Walter Hill for 12 years, Remar said. "He didn't hire me again for 12 years, and I know why, because I made him look bad." Word spread fast in Hollywood, directors didn't want the risk, studios backed away. Remar later admitted that period of his life was chaotic. He was unreliable, angry, and losing control. His drug use wasn't just impacting sets, it was affecting his relationships, his reputation, his family. He's been honest about it in interviews since, how it nearly cost him everything, and in a way it did. Because after Aliens, the roles dried up. The flame had been extinguished, and for a while it looked like James Remar might disappear completely. There were still roles, but not the kind that get you back on the A-list. He took what he could get. B-movies, straight-to-video thrillers, minor supporting parts. But if you watch closely, you could see it. He was rebuilding, quietly, slowly, brick by brick. In the 90s, he found his way into darker genre fare like Tales from the Crypt, Miracle on 34th Street, and The Phantom, where he played the villain Quill, all snarls and brutality. He showed up in Mortal Kombat Annihilation as Raiden. A strange bit of casting, sure, but it kept him in the public eye. He became a kind of underground icon, the kind of actor where, even if the movie wasn't great, you were still glad to see him. There's a toughness to that kind of career. The glossier roles weren't coming in, but he kept working, and slowly directors started calling again. Not the big ones, not yet, but enough to keep him in the fight. And that fight would pay off in the 2000s, when a certain serial killer drama came calling. In 2006, James Remar landed a role that redefined him for an entirely new generation. Harry Morgan, the ghostly, ever-present father of Dexter Morgan. It was a complete shift from the violent heavies he'd made a career out of. Instead of snarling threats, Remar was calm, focused, a moral compass in a show that had none. And yet, even in that stillness, he never lost his edge. There was always something simmering underneath, a kind of tension, like even Harry was capable of crossing a line if pushed too far. Remar appeared in nearly every episode of Dexter's original run. He wasn't the lead, but he was always there, a constant voice in Dexter's ear, shaping every decision, every code. And audiences loved him for it. The role earned him some of the best reviews of his career. Around the same time, he started to find his groove as a voice actor. He voiced Raiden again in Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe and lent his gravelly tones to everything from animated Batman to Call of Duty. It was like the industry had finally caught up to what Remar always had. That weight and presence, that ability to make you listen, even when he wasn't saying much. Even after Dexter wrapped, James Remar kept going. He started showing up in big shows again. Gotham, The Shannara Chronicles, The Rookie, The Path, State of Affairs. Always playing men with gravity, men with history in their eyes. There's something about Remar now that feels even more powerful with age. That same dangerous energy is still there, it's just a bit quieter, more restrained. Like the storm is further out to sea, but no less threatening. He even landed recurring roles in Wilfred, Black Lightning, and Grey's Anatomy, the kind of network staples where audiences might not know the name, but they recognise the face, and more importantly, the voice. And if you look closer, you'll spot him in everything from Judge Dredd to X-Men First Class to Django Unchained, always adding weight even in small roles. He became one of those actors who never needed the spotlight but always gave a scene weight, the kind of presence that doesn't fade. His career, like his persona, was tough and resilient and seemed to weather the storm. Even now in his 70s he's still working, still taking roles and still showing up. He's been in more than 150 films and TV shows and counting. It's not a comeback, that's survival. Through all the chaos, the rise, the fall, the second act, James Remar kept one part of his life steady. He's been married to Atsuko Remar since 1984. That's over 4 decades in a town where relationships rarely last more than a few years. Together they raised 2 children and by all accounts kept their family life private, quiet, grounded and away from all the noise. In interviews, Remar rarely talks about himself. He's not big on self-promotion. He doesn't seem interested in rewriting his past or spinning some glossy version of his story. And there's a humility there, a sense that he knows exactly what he's survived and what it cost him. He lives in California now, still takes the occasional role, still shows up at conventions, still talks to fans who know exactly who he is. And maybe that's the legacy, not reinvention or comeback, just endurance. A man who burned bright, fell hard, picked himself up, dusted himself off, and kept going anyway. James Remar never became a household name. He never had the franchise, the Oscar moment, the big glossy redemption arc, but maybe that's exactly what makes him so memorable. He was the guy who turned up in the third act and stole the scene, the guy you couldn't quite place but always remembered, the guy with the gravel voice, the heavy stare, the tension you could feel through the screen. He played killers, cops, cop killers, outlaws, mentors, and ghosts. And he played them all like they meant something. There's a certain kind of actor who doesn't need to be the lead to carry weight, and Remar is without doubt one of them. He made every scene feel more alive, more dangerous, more interesting, and even now, decades after The Warriors, 48 Hours and Dexter, people still talk about him, still quote him, still go, wait, that's James Remar. He's a survivor and a journeyman, and above all, one hell of an actor. Thanks for watching, everyone. I release 2 new videos every week, diving into the lives and careers of the actors we grew up watching, the ones we never forget. So if you enjoyed this one, feel free to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know your favourite James Remar role or who you'd like to see covered next. I really do look forward to seeing you all in the next one.